family, and welcome back live from St. Peter's Square, bringing you the context, the vision, all of the writings, and all of the different audiences that the Holy Father, Pope Leo XIV, has held and will have. This is your place for all of the information about this new pontificate, and I'm here with our fabulous co-host, Monsignor Landry. I don't know that calling you fabulous is the best way to introduce you, but I'll take it for now.
I don't tell fables. I try to tell the truth.
Monsignor Landry, the National Director of the Pontifical Mission Societies USA, and Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. And of course, I'm Montse Alvarado, your President of EWTN News. And the Square is getting ready for Sunday. What can you tell us about what these preparations look like, Matthew?
Well, everything's moving toward the Mass for the beginning of the pontificate, as they call it, the Petrine mission of the Holy Father on Sunday. So basically, think of it as an installation Mass. So we're going to see, as we did with the funeral, but this is a very different tone. There will be a celebration Mass, a Eucharistic celebration, where he will, I think that one of the big moments there is his receiving of the pallium, that symbol of office as a metropolitan, but also a symbol of his office for the whole of the church. We always have to be clear that it is not like he is getting inaugurated. So this is not like some celebration where now he assumes the office. When he was elected, when he accepted the office and took his name, he had full authority over the whole church.
And we'll get into what he's been doing with that full authority in a second. Monsignor Landry, we are still in this wonderful Easter season, celebrating all of the richness that comes with that. And today's readings, today's feast day in particular, speak into what we're living at this moment. Tell us about that.
May 14th is the feast of St. Matthias, who is the one who took the place of Judas after Judas's betrayal. So they wanted to turn to God and see whom he would choose to take the place as one of the apostles. And so the Feast of St. Matthias is an opportunity for us to mark the great gift of apostolic succession. That is not arbitrary. It's not something that comes from human beings. It comes from God. There's holy orders there. And we have just celebrated, beginning on May 8th, the great mystery of apostolic succession, that from Peter to Linus to Cletus to Clement, all the way to Benedict to Francis to Leo XIV, that is that great uninterrupted mystery. And beyond just who the individual who's going to occupy the chair of Peter, there's the great gift of God who always provides. And so the Feast of St. Matthias, personally, I was rooting that today would be the Mass for the inauguration of the Petrine ministry. Happy to have it on a Sunday during the Easter season, all the rest of it. But this mystery matters for our whole Catholic faith as well as for the papacy.
Now, we know that part of the business that was conducted by the Holy Father today included a visit from an avid sports fan and sportsman, I would say, with a particular last name. Can you tell us about that gathering?
So today he met the top male tennis player in the world, Jacob Sinner, who is an Italian. It's tough, just like the former Archbishop of Manila was called Jaime Sin. So Jacob Sinner has been tortured his entire life as a big sinner. A couple days ago, Inez San Martin, who works with me at the Pontifical Mission Societies, tried to induce the Holy Father to do a charity tennis match. She said, I'd bring a famous old American who's a good friend of hers. And he said, well, you could bring anybody, but just don't bring Sinner.
Yes.
Which was very, very funny because of the double entendre on Sinner. And wouldn't you know, 2 days later, Pope Francis is meeting with Jacob Sinner.
Pope Leo.
There I go.
That's okay. We've been doing it all day.
Pope Leo is meeting with Jacob Sinner, and Jacob Sinner was incredibly reverent. They brought the Coppa Italia here, so the award, whoever's going to win the male championship, was brought on over in a sense to get it blessed. Brought some rackets. They were trying some things out. Jacob Sinner wanted to play Pope Leo in the little sala at the back of the Paul VI. The Holy Father wisely said, we'll wait for another time. He took a rain check.
Well, hopefully that'll be the time that Inez gets her wish, which is to have him play for charity, which would be a beautiful thing for the church and obviously something much needed with the number of wars around the world.
I'm picturing some of these old editors in newsrooms. Pope meets sinner. That's not news.
That's true. Oh, well, that's fantastic. There's more work that he started doing, Pope Leo, since the beginning. He started communicating important messages to us, and one of those messages was part of his message after the Regina Coeli on the Eastern churches, which we know we're in the middle of that Jubilee right now. Let's listen to what he had to say.
I carry in my heart the sufferings of the beloved Ukrainian people. May everything possible be done to reach an authentic, just and lasting peace as soon as possible. Let all the prisoners be freed and the children return to their own families.
E I bambini possano tornare alle proprie famiglie.
Now, I know we've talked about this just and lasting peace, the characteristics of the type of peace that the Holy Father wants us to bring, that he wants to teach us about so that we can internalize that. And part of the encounter with the Eastern churches this morning was obviously the encounter with the leaders of the Eastern churches. Matthew, what can you tell us about that?
Well, that's right. So as part of the Jubilee, the Holy Father had an encounter similar to what he had with the media, although it wasn't, the Jubilee for that happened back in January. I know you were here for that. But it was a very important moment, I think, especially early in this pontificate, because of what he said. Set aside all of the beautiful theology that he had, and I know we can talk more about that. His gesture of reaching out to them and telling them, you are important.
That's
we are
right.
grateful for you, and we hear you, and we understand what you have gone through. That simple set of statements, I think, has already gone a long way with the Eastern Catholics across the world, all 23 of those churches who live in places where there is immense suffering, where they themselves endure hardships, social disabilities, and outright oppression. So it was a gesture, I think, right at the start that had deep meaning for them. And then he began expressing his love for their liturgies. And talked also he pointed right at Cardinal Gujarati,
That's right.
whose homily we heard during the Novendiales, the morning of Pope Francis, who is the head of the Eastern churches for their dicastery, and talking about we have to find ways for Latin bishops to come to appreciate more the Eastern Catholic churches, but also to be even better shepherds for the diaspora.
Absolutely, and really pointed out that if they don't understand the Eastern churches and the gift that they are, they're not good pastors. I mean, it was an admonition almost. It's quite wonderful to listen to.
He said something even stronger than that, that if they don't appreciate, or worse, try to make Eastern Rite Catholics, Latin Rite Catholics, they should be removed from office.
There you go. That's right.
It was super strong that is so contrary to what a pastor should be for the Catholics who are entrusted to him in a geographic region, that he doesn't deserve the office if he misses that so badly. It was clear to me in listening to Pope Leo speak to the Eastern bishops that he really had a deep understanding of their issues, their sufferings, not just from war zones,
Yes.
but often sometimes their sufferings within the church where they're just not adequately appreciated for who they are and their incredible gifts. That was a home run that he hit on his first swing before our Eastern Catholic brothers and sisters.
Well, we do know that this group here breathes heavy with the Eastern lung, if we've got two lungs, because of that appreciation, that love of liturgy, and that love of kind of our ancestry, where we come from, wanting to be deeply rooted in the traditions and history of the Church. Monsignor Landry, part of this Jubilee involves going to different places, experiencing those liturgies in a really big way. What can you tell us about that one visit to St. Mary Major, what that looked like, why they had that specific icon?
So they were going over to St. Mary Major in order to give proper homage to Our Lady. The love for Our Lady, the Theotokos, the God-bearer in Eastern churches, is a challenge to us in the Latin West. We have a great devotion to Our Lady, but theirs is so incredibly profound. They've used all their skills to be able to put the most beautiful hymns together, and they sang one to Our Lady. They call it the Akathist hymn, which literally means they stand. They only stand for two things. They stand for Jesus when he's present, and then they stand for Our Lady out of incredible love, and they sing these long, intricate, beautiful hymns to Our Lady, which for me, listening to them when I've got the CDs or now the MP3s from the Russians, from the Ukrainians, from the Byzantines in general, it's a little bit of an experience of heaven where you're participating in what the choirs of angels, I hope, are likewise doing before the Mother, God the Father, chose for his Son.
That's exactly right. Well, Matthew, we had Archbishop His Grace Gudziak here with us this morning, and he was responding to what he felt in meeting the Holy Father and what the significance that visit really had for him. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Today we were listeners. All of us met him for the first time. I think we were all touched from the very moment he appeared on the balcony. He's a very kind man, a sensitive man, very sensible and careful with words. He's somebody that has touched Ukrainians from day one. On Sunday, when he spoke to the city and the world, would be at Orbi, he told the Ukrainians that you are close, you are in my heart. I hold you in my heart, you suffering people. I will work and pray for a just peace, a peace that is lasting. And I will work to free prisoners and the tens of thousands of children that were abducted by the Russians.
To free prisoners and the tens of thousands of children. This is an agenda of things that the Holy Father wants to do and aims that he has for the people in Ukraine.
Absolutely right. And he wasted no time after his election in reaching out and actually having a conversation with Vladimir Zelensky. So the president of Ukraine is clearly on his radar. He's, we know, in touch with the Ukrainian Catholic leadership. As we just saw, he had his expressions today about it. So in his list of priorities, I think Ukraine is top of mind, especially for someone who came out on the loggia. And what were the very first things he said? Peace be with you. But again, it's that authentic peace. It is a peace that only can come from the risen Christ. It can't come necessarily from treaties. It can't come from just ceasefires that they will break at some point in the future. It has to be an authentic peace. And I think that's, from that perspective, I think as he moves forward, listening, but then reaching out, I'm actually very optimistic that this time the intervention on the part of the Holy See may be more effective than it has been.
How has that changed?
There's been a big change in apostolic succession between Francis and Leo, because Francis was very confusing with regard to the conflict in Ukraine. He was often praising things from Russia and almost seeming to criticize stuff coming from Ukraine. And the Vatican Secretary of State needed to say some things without directly countermanding what Pope Francis was saying, basically give the other side. It was one of the rare times in his papacy where nobody could really understand what Pope Francis was doing. In reparation of that, in making up for lost time, Pope Leo has been crystal clear, which is becoming an evident characteristic of his entire papacy, in saying we're working with our Christian brothers and sisters in Ukraine for what are justly their rights. And a just peace is not going to be what's been mentioned in the last month, ceding all of this ground that was basically occupied, that there were wars and lots of carnage. That can't be rewarded. Pope Leo hasn't said those words, but the fact that he's been aligning himself with the suffering Ukrainian people is really significant for anybody who has a well-informed conscience about how to respond to what's happening in Ukraine because of Russia's invasion.
He could have chosen anything. He could have chosen the migrant crisis. He could have chosen, but he has chosen to define himself by this, at least for now, in the beginning of it. For those of us who don't have a lot of experience with the Eastern churches, don't really understand how they're, what they're composed of, where they come from, I think it is also important to consider that their challenges sometimes might be similar to our challenges, in addition to the reality of war. So I did ask Archbishop Gudziak that question. Here's what he had to say.
We all breathe the same air, watch the same, internet, and we have the same basic human challenges. One fact that distinguishes the Eastern Catholic experience, particularly in modern times, is war, violence, and persecution. Almost all of the Eastern Catholic churches in the Middle East, in North Africa, today in Ukraine, but also in Asia, are suffering from some kind of injustice, some kind of violence. And in many places, our communities are being depleted by that violence. People are forced to flee wars. And there's a great danger that churches that have 2,000 years of history, that, for example, still speak and pray in the language of Jesus, Aramaic, they might be extinguished. And today, the Holy Father spoke some very strong words, quoting his predecessor, Leo XIII, saying, any Roman Catholic minister that does not respect the Eastern rites and tries to Latinize the Eastern Christians, bring them into the Latin Church because of disrespect of their own tradition, should cease doing ministry. I mean, that was very strong.
There's the admonition. We just heard it from someone who so desperately wants to keep this tradition. For those who don't understand the 23 churches, Monsignor Landry, how would you explain what we have there in communion with the Latin Rite?
So there are different histories that are involved. At the beginning, there were just the original churches that were there. And so we would see that, for example, with the Maronite Eastern churches or the Melkite Eastern churches. And then you've got other churches that had split off in 1054 with the great schism between East and West, between Orthodox and Catholic, who eventually came back into communion. And so that's what we're dealing with Ukrainian Orthodox, for example. That's what we're dealing with some of the other churches of the Assyrian Catholic Church now in the Middle East. There's a Coptic Catholic as well as a Coptic Orthodox. What he was saying about the persecution, though, is very real. The Ukrainians by far are the largest Eastern Catholic Church, and they're suffering. All the other ones are much smaller. And so it's very easy for bullies to try to gang up in various countries on these smaller Christian minorities because they're singular and because sometimes, let's be blunt, there's envy involved because of the educational prowess of Catholics anywhere. And so they are suffering. And as he said, Pope Leo came right on out and he noted that almost everywhere Christians are suffering. So rather than being neglected, they are right here in the heart of the successor of St. Peter. He's not forgetting them, and he's trying to wake up all the Latin Rite Catholics around the world to care for our brothers and sisters better who worship the Lord in the Eastern liturgies.
Yeah, and the Ukrainians especially, they came in the late 17th century in the Union of Brest. That matters because what you're looking at then are centuries of oppression, centuries of violence. And then when you look around the world, he was mentioning Asia. You have the Syro-Malankara, you have the Syro-Malabar. All of them are also under threat from Hindu nationalist groups, long-standing oppression there. And then even in the United States, this is one of those little forgotten chapters that many Eastern Catholics who arrived on the shores of the United States they didn't have priests, and they were not treated well at all by some of the dioceses or parishes because they didn't understand who they were. They just assumed they were Orthodox.
Well, we know that suffering is something that we learn from. It's something that is part of our lives. Our Lord didn't promise to make all of our conflicts go away. He promised to be there with us and walk with us. And that particular sense of suffering was really felt in this interview with Archbishop Gudziak. Let's listen to this closing reflection he had.
Our salvation happens through the cross. And right now, Ukraine is crucified. And it is clear that the Lord who has chosen the cross is choosing also this people, this land, to show his power, to show his truth. It is always small. The number of people that see it immediately is not large. There were not many people who recognized the resurrected Lord. There are not many to whom he appeared. But it's the authenticity, the truth of that gospel seed that gave life to the church.
Authenticity and truth, which we know is so important for younger generations. One man who has been out there trying to rally as many young people in Fatima as possible is one of our own, our Franciscan friar, Father John Paul, who went to Fatima on the feast day. He was actually there yesterday and had this wonderful message of love and prayer for all of us and for our audience. I'd love to share that with you all right now.
I'm at the place where we light candles and pray for intentions. Look at these candles. I have never lit candles this big in my life. And I'm lighting these candles, praying for, especially for EWTN viewers, listeners, benefactors, those who make our work possible, especially last couple weeks being in Rome. The coverage there has been so awesome. So I just wanted to pray and to thank God for those you viewers who make our work possible. If it wasn't for you, the work and mission of EWTN would not go through. So thank you so much. I'm lighting these candles in Lord's for you. Look at these candles. God bless you.
Big candles for big prayers. It's so important. I think one of the things that we know in this network sets us apart prayer, devotion to Our Lady, and understanding of our Lord Jesus Christ. And a wonderful communicator himself is here with us, Danielle Arasa, who is the head of the dean of the Church Communication School at Santa Croce University here in Rome. You have formed more church communicators than I can count. What do you see in them? What do you see in the new generations coming in that you have to form to be able to communicate the church to the world?
Well, certainly there is a desire for evangelization. No? Many of them are here sent by their own bishops, by the superiors of the religious congregations, or lay people who really wants to serve the church in this capacity, as communicators. So there is this desire, and at the same time, they realize of the need of professionalization. So formation or training really to do the job well, because evangelizing in today's world is not easy.
Well, we've certainly benefited from that professionalization. We have a lot of EWTN individuals at the family members, I would say, at the Vatican Bureau who have benefited from the courses that you offer. How do you see a difference in the way that Pope Leo has asserted his communication style when you compare him to Pope Francis or even to Pope John Paul II, Saint John Paul II?
Well, each Pope is different. So in that sense, each Pope brings with him its own style. And certainly Pope Leo, from the first moment that he appears on the balcony of St. Peter's right behind us, show a different style of communicating. I think this Pope is a kind of an integrator. He has some elements from John Paul II, the theatrality, this idea, this no fear of speaking to the crowds, but at the same time is very equilibrated, very serene, and at the same time is spontaneous without the explosion, I would say, if you allow me, of the way that Pope Francis had as a Latin American. So in that sense, he has elements from all of them, but with the depth, also the theological depth that somehow of Benedict XVI.
That's
so
right.
Even in the words, in the way that he dresses, etc. So in this sense, he's its own style, keeping the essential aspects from the previous ones.
What role do you think that the church communicators, so those who are Catholic journalists, are going to play in communicating the Pope to the world and his ministry? How will that be well served by the Catholic media?
Well, that's always a challenge. It has been always a challenge. Presenting the Christian faith to the modern world or contemporary world is not an easy thing. Certainly, this Pope, because of his background, at least for the things that we know and the things that he has said, he has shown that he has many dimensions, no? The theological, the spiritual dimension, the apostolic dimension, and that's an opportunity for Catholic communicators to really deep into the different elements that he presents. Just a quick example, he's quoting, at least until now, in all his speeches or homilies, some father of the church.
Yes.
And that's a great opportunity for Catholic media to really explain. We have here experts on that. So to explain the meaning, the history, the impact of the theology and the teachings behind each father of the church. So the opportunities will be great for us.
Well, Monsignor Landry, you have done a lot of secular media in this time, in addition to the great gift that you've given the EWTN family and being a part of our coverage. How have you seen a difference in the way that they understand what we're doing here and the way that we communicate it?
So they have begun to use EWTN as a real source, right? Whereas in the past, it was something that they didn't want to take all that seriously because they wanted to pretend as if they could be experts on everything better than those who are full-time Catholics. Now there's been a much greater humility that's been coming from some of these major networks about what their blind spots are and how they need to hear from full-timers. The second thing that I've seen in the way that they've been trying to cover it is they have really broadened the Rolodex of whom to call in order to speak. They're just not getting pretty faces up there anymore. They're specifically trying to bring people who know what they're talking about so that they're able to get the right story the first time rather than try to correct it. It's not been a perfect attempt on their part, but I am very pleased to see that EWTN and good Catholic media are lifting all the boats in the harbor for better coverage of things ecclesiastical. And that's one of the reasons why Pope Leo, when he met with journalists, was able to give a sincere thanks for the attempts made to cover.
Danielle, when you think about the reality of American media, a pope that speaks in English, how is that going to also be a difference in this pontificate?
Well, certainly that will help because the short even images or cuts that media needs for covering and presenting the news, which sometimes are very short, will be facilitated by this direct communication with English speakers. It's also true that this Pope speaks English, but he's a very universal, and he showed that speaking also in Italian the first day. So he's not just thinking in an American audience or in an English-speaking audience. He's thinking in all over the world. But certainly that his facilitation for languages, Spanish, Italian, English, will facilitate communications in the
But the Italian media have certainly played an outsized role because they had everything first and they could then communicate it to all the rest of us. Is the English language going to play a different role here? Will we be able to share something first?
I'm sure that in some occasions that will be an advantage. I cannot deny that. But it's also true that the Vatican is in Rome, the culture is Italian, and we have to understand that. Speaking with some journalists, sometimes the importance of knowing the original is very important. And the Vatican works in Italian most of the time, writes in Italian, and thinks in Italian. This is something that needs to be taken into account when you are covering a reality like a religious institution like this.
And I think the reality of the Bishop of Rome, too, then plays a certain role. Matthew, how would you say that his Italianness and facility in the Italian language will also allow for a closeness with the Roman people?
Well, consider that when we were assessing the papabili, possible candidates, what was one of the things that we consider to be essentially disqualifying? If they could not converse properly in Italian. So we have that, but he is the Bishop of Rome, so this is his diocese. Now he's head of the church by virtue of being Bishop of Rome. But one thing I think that we have seen already with Pope Leo is that he has a deep sense of Romanitas, that he understands the culture here. His Italian is elegant, his pronunciation, his Latin is superb, which is the official language of the church. But one thing too is that I think he has already demonstrated a capacity to speak with clarity in media sound bites that are very effective, but he's also able to speak with such calmness. There's a certain serene aspect to him. You know, when we get these Vatican bulletins, they'll have a discussion. It was serene, usually code word for something else. But he actually does have a certain serenity about him, un papa calma. So there's a calmness to him, and he's controlling, not in a prideful way, but he's controlling his situations well, and that makes him, I think, a very effective communicator.
Well, Dani, I want to give you the last word. I think it's important that we hear from someone who's a local communicator informing the church. What gives you hope about church communicators in this pontificate?
Well, I think the first element is that this Pope is a young Pope. So we have, hopefully, and thanks God, many years ahead to really deepen into the richness of the church and developing and explaining the magisterium of the Leo XIV and his aid, the people that will help him in this magisterium. So that will be a great opportunity, and also being a pope that integrates so many cultures, so many categories, not only cultures, a Latin American, English speaker, his continuity with Pope Francis, but also reclaiming the past, the tradition of the previous pontificates. So that's a richness that will give us lots of opportunity to communicate the church and help in the task of evangelization.
Running forward with the catechism, catechizing, and evangelizing. I do have one shout out for wonderful viewers, members of the EWTN family. I'm going to read this out so that I get it out. I want to say a special hello to Elke, Father Warren, and the whole Huon Valley Parish of Tasmania in Australia. Lots of love and prayers to you all here live from St. Peter's Square. We're so grateful to have you as viewers and listeners. And of course, to our friends on radio, we're grateful that you're with us. We want to make sure that you know that we will continue to describe all of the sounds and smells of the Vatican for you. So please stay tuned. And we will, of course, have a special before the Mass on Sunday to explain all of the different symbols that you will see. So come back and join us live from St. Peter's Square. Have a wonderful evening, and God bless you.